the experiences that people have, whether they're normative experiences, traumatic experiences, major life events, or something like a psychedelic, mystical type of experience, I think that these experiences help shape who we are and who we become.
An experience is a glimpse, right?
Exactly.
It's something that you can see that shows you, oh, there's something here. But then the work to stabilize that is not, that's up to you and your mind after the fact, I think.
Whatever happens in a person's path and on their life journey to help them on their way is relative. You know, psychedelics will help people that it's meant for.
Yeah.
You know, you say that Mother Ayahuasca calls people to her because she realizes that they need her assistance.
Yeah.
And so I think people who have a calling will experience what they need to experience.
The empirical investigation of the nature of mind.
Yeah.
Which is what psychology is saying it's doing. So that, to me, they're just the same thing. Like we have prescribed this word to it, but what we mean is becoming familiar with mind.
Yeah.
And I think that if insofar as somebody wants to take that out of it, that's to take out the whole thing, right? Something that I think is a really interesting part of the conversation around what we talk about on this podcast, which most of the time is like idealism, right? Like Alex and I started this to talk about the philosophy kind of, but really we're talking about, in doing that, talking about an entire metaphysics and a worldview. And then there's all these different associated things with that, whether it's spiritual practice or whether it's AI and science and whatever, like, and how, because when you start talking about an ontology, a totally different ontology, that affects like every aspect of life, right? And so anyway, one of those topics is psychedelics and how they fit into that picture of either spirituality, mental health, which are, in my view, very related things, and also philosophy and ontology and everything else. So
worldview.
thanks for joining me.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that, you know, when we talk about idealism and the philosophy of mind and stuff like that, I think that it's difficult not to talk about the experiences that would lead a person or persuade a person into an idealist framework to begin with. And it starts with that subjective and intersubjective experience, right? And so the experiences that people have, whether they're normative experiences, traumatic experiences, major life events, or something like a psychedelic, mystical type of experience, I think that these experiences help shape who we are and who we become.
Yeah.
Right. And how we integrate, and that's like a key word in psychotherapy and world of psychedelics, and in the world of, say, psycho-spiritual development. You know, how are we going to integrate the experiences into our moment-to-moment experience in terms of how we view ourselves, view the world, view others, view death, the existential questions. And so, I think that these types of experiences yield these types of thoughts and pursuits in people, and it's absolutely important to talk about. I think that anybody who takes idealism seriously, I bet you the majority of them have the perspective because of some type of an experience like this, psychedelics or otherwise.
Yeah, and so that's a great place to start, because like that tracks to me perfectly, actually, because for myself, you know, not so much for this conversation, because my experience didn't come through a psychedelic. It came through a meditative, introspective practice that was, though, nevertheless experiential. And if not for the experience that I had of looking at the nature of mind there, idealism would have been something that I just thought was like word salad that doesn't make any sense, and I'd have nothing to reference at all to those words. And never, and suffice it to say, this is the criticism that I get often, talking to somebody that's a physicalist, let's say, or somebody who has no experience with what I'm talking about, but just is listening to an argument I'm making or a philosophy that I'm talking about. I get that, oh, that just sounds like word salad to me. That just
Right.
sounds like you just said a bunch of gibberish. Like it doesn't track and mean anything. And so I had an experience through a meditative practice at first that I then needed to explain with a philosophy later. And that integration you're talking about is what that process is digesting the experience, and making sense of it in your worldview and that kind of a thing. And so the question is like that to start out here is I think we both agree that the experience is primary. It's like the more important thing than sort of believing in a philosophy or a set of beliefs.
Yeah.
It's the thing that changes your life.
Mhm.
Believing a concept might be intellectually stimulating, but it doesn't change the way that the world looks to you when you wake up in the morning, right? And so experience being primary, I guess the first question would be, um, do we think that having psychedelic experiences um, are helpful in sort of what I just described, giving somebody some sort of experience that causes them to reevaluate their worldview?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't think that there's any doubt about that. Obviously, we should throw out some disclaimers in terms of there are people with biochemical makeups, situations, psychiatric types of situations, where something like this is they're not ready for it and
Yep.
might impact them in a negative direction.
Yes.
So there should be all kinds of caution
Yes.
leading into something that's going to alter your state of consciousness and mind and perception of
Yes.
yourself and the world. It might be dramatic. It might be an intense, dramatic change that the person's not fully capable of, and then it spirals into a nightmare
Yeah.
or a bad
And I
trip.
and I think that's part of what we'll get into is
Uh,
this particular route.
uh,
Like, is it advised, or is it also, where does it fit
yeah,
in the whole scheme, the greater scheme of things, and with all of these disclaimers intact of
yeah,
like, you
no,
know, uh yes, it can cause some good. What kind of harms are also to look
absolutely.
out for sure. And whether or not, like, and we'll get into all these topics, I think, where does it fit
Mhm.
in a let's say more holistic spiritual practice, or more holistic investigation into the nature of reality? If we don't want to use the word spiritual, just where does this kind of a thing fit, and where is it appropriate and where is it not appropriate, maybe, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of where it's appropriate, that is relative to the individual.
Hmm.
In the sense that will it lead to psychosis and
Mm.
delusion,
Mm.
or will it lead to healing
Yeah.
and self-awareness and that sort of thing? And so that is relative. Obviously, the statistics show and demonstrate. My background in psychology, more
Yeah. Yeah.
clinical
Yeah.
than research.
Yeah.
Worked in the field for 10 years. I got to teach psychology for 8 years. I didn't work in the fields of psychedelic or do any psychedelic research, but I'm aware of the therapeutic value and efficacy of them, as I am with different modalities like mindfulness and meditation
Yeah.
and breath work and that sort of thing. And so these are definitely therapeutic modalities, with psychedelics being on another level though.
Mm.
Look, I've done my meditation retreats. I've done practices of yoga, fasting, of breath work, and I've seen tremendous results with those, right?
Hmm.
With those modalities, but the transformative effects and the immediacy of what something like psychedelics could potentially do for a person who's healthy and would benefit from it is, I mean, it's eye opening in terms of what the research shows. Like I
Mm.
said, you're talking about a 60 to 80% of efficacy for PTSD and depression and anxiety and
Right.
self-esteem and addiction, something
Yeah.
like ibogaine.
Yeah.
Like this is not something. This data that we're looking at is not something insignificant. I mean, especially compared to other psychiatric interventions
Yes.
for
Yes.
these for these ailments, quite eye opening to see how transformative and impactful a 4 hour experience can be. In the literature, it's often said that 4 hours of such an experience, could equivocate to multiple years of actual therapy and processing and
Sure.
emotional release over time. That's how powerful it is.
Yeah, so what you just said there is like a ton. Is
Mm,
great. And let's sort of dig into that a little bit because I think there's two things we can almost like separate here, even though they're I don't think they're really separable completely at all. But let's pretend they are for a second. There's something you started out with, which was I've had all this meditative experience, retreats, different practices, spiritual practices. That then you said those have been transformative for me. Many people would start something like that or be told, let's say that they're already open enough to say, hey, there's something to be seen in a meditative practice or whatever. But you could have somebody sit down and there's something completely sort of just being convinced to try this, right? And they say they can sit and meditate for even sit a retreat for a week or something, right? But certainly they can sit and meditate for the 4 hours that you're talking about, and
mm,
absolutely nothing can happen. Nothing
right,
mind blowing. Nothing. They could just be like, okay, that was kind of interesting. I could like see my mind a little bit, and so what,
uh,
right? What tends not to happen if that same 4 hours is spent on a psychedelic is somebody goes, "Oh, well, that so what? I don't know. Nothing really happened, right? Like something's gonna happen."
something
And
Terrence McKenna,
yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean,
Something's gonna happen.
yeah, it would suffice it to say, it's the story's not going to be well. I mean, I shouldn't say this. There are cases actually where people can take a psychedelic and sort of have no reaction to it. I know there's like medical reasons for that sometimes, but I think there's also psychological reasons for that sometimes too. But
Mm,
at any rate, most of the time, something's going to happen, and you won't have an experience on a psychedelic where you just say, well, nothing to see here. I don't know what you're talking about, right?
right,
But at the same time, and so I guess like one of the first things you see is that if there's somebody that needs to get over a hump of just that whether or not there's a there, right?
mm,
Whether or not there's something to be looked at when you look at your mind or not. This can kind of give somebody an answer to that question. Like,
mhm,
oh, there are states of mind that
to
you
look
were
at,
not previously aware of. And so there's something to see here, right? And
yeah,
to me, I think the value is the biggest value when it comes to um, outside the therapeutic realm in the spiritual realm or in the just investigation into the nature of who am I or what is this.
mhm,
There is something there that's going to happen, and you are going to um have a chance to get over something that maybe you might just bounce off meditation and never see, right?
mhm,
And just kind of throw out the whole project of introspective practice.
mhm,
And then, sorry to go on for so long, but then the other side of it that you brought up is okay. Um, Outside of just sort of these deeper questions about who am I, what is reality, in the therapeutic realm of addiction, depression, traumatic stress, all of these things, they can also similarly provide sort of like a catalyst or like a boost that without, if you're just trying to do therapy, let's say,
right,
without any assistance here from some sort of a, a chemical enhancement of some kind, there may be a similar cliff that you like can never get over the hump
mhm,
because because you just kind of can't stay with it, or it's not gonna have the same transformative effect on your mind. So I think like in both realms, there's this similar function
mm,
that the psychedelic can serve, which has to do with breaking through a barrier that is there, right? Would
mhm.
you agree with that or no?
Oh, absolutely. I think that there's some key phrases that you've mentioned there, both in terms of breaking through barriers as well as psychedelics being a catalyst. I think that's a very important point to make is that They are not the answer in of themselves,
Mm,
but
mm,
they definitely reveal to the individual what is necessary moving forward,
mm.
right? And so what I found is that whereas, prior to these practices, prior to the psychedelic experience, the meditative practice or yogic practices might even seem mundane or nothing to see here except some relaxation type of scenario. This definitely puts you into a space where there's no running from it.
Yeah,
The introspection happens.
yeah,
Life flashes before your eyes. There's the ego death potentially, depending on the potency of what the experience could yield. Um, and so there's a lot of benefit there, but it should be a catalyst that leads to a person developing a lifestyle,
yes.
right? With contemplative practice, with ways and abilities to reset without needing a full boost in a psychedelic sense, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I think that's really important what you just
Yeah.
said in that why I sort of framed it as getting over a hump,
Mhm.
because there's an old phrase in the psychedelic world, like, once you get the message, you're supposed to hang up the
Thank
phone, right? And so the a caution here is, if you think about it in terms of spiritual terms, like an experience is not enlightenment. An experience is a glimpse, right?
Exactly.
It's something that you can see that shows you, oh, there's something here, but then the work to stabilize that is not that's up to you and your mind after the fact, I think. And so, like what you mentioning there of it being um not Sam Harris uses the word, it's orthogonal to the, like, let's say, the spiritual path. It's related, but it's not the thing. And so if it becomes the practice, like
Yeah.
if it becomes, my spiritual practice is I do mushrooms once a week, like that's going to be a problem,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if one thing I think that the reflections that psychedelics cause is that are the things that they resort to that we're addicted to in general. So
Mm,
something like ibogaine or psilocybin could actually help a person get wean off of addictions and
yeah.
drugs that they were dependent on. But chemical dependency is a bad thing. You don't. If the idea is not to be chemically dependent on something, but to develop natural and healthy lifestyle choices that yield the types of results that psychedelics are kind of pushing you towards or pointing you towards that are possible in terms of inner states of mind,
Yeah.
perception of self, perception of others, perception of world and death and life, and that sort of thing. And and so it's a process, right, in terms of the experience itself, and then processing the experience, and then integrating the experience,
Right.
right, at an emotional and psychological level and behavioral level.
Right. Which is actually not different from any meditative experience you might have as well. Like, because plenty of people have profound experiences during a meditative practice as well. And there's a danger in that too, that you can get sort of addicted to the meditative practice experience
Yeah.
rather than take the lesson from that.
Uh,
And it's not, it's showing you something. It's not showing you that you should be constantly returning to that particular state
right.
all the time. And something that is also, I think, a danger with psychedelics. It's a little bit different, and I know from my own experience, because I have experience with both. I have meditative experience first, like I said at the outset, when we started talking, that I had an experience of that showed me something about the nature of mind. And then much later on, I had psychedelic experiences that were in the therapeutic realm, that weren't even aimed at some kind of metaphysical or self exploration other than with the psychological level. Um and the what I'm saying is that uh in both cases, like, the thing with the meditation is that the experience is going to be somewhat ordinary still. Whereas on the psychedelic, the experience can be so, like, the world can collapse, right? And so there can be a tendency to think, well, in order to, like, what this thing is about is this totally extraordinary experience that is not anything like normal everyday life, right? And so one of the dangers of that can happen is you can have an experience of transcendence, let's say, on a psychedelic that's also associated with the entire physical world becoming something completely different, right? And you could say, well, that was special for that state, and it's not something that I should be trying to integrate into
Mhm.
my. Do you get what I'm sort of getting at there?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Then
Hmm.
you're not, but you're not integrating. The idea isn't to somehow integrate the visual effects and and the the collapse of the ego into somehow you're experiencing that all the time. That's not
Yeah,
the
yeah,
idea.
or more just that,
Yeah.
like, worst danger, I think, is more taking the conclusion that, well, that's a very special state of mind that can only happen in extraordinary circumstances,
Mhm.
and that this is something for like a memory,
Mhm.
not like something that I'm trying to integrate
Right.
as a more grounded regular
Right.
part of my everyday experience. And because the psychedelic experiences can be so wild, it can just make it seem like, well, whatever I experienced during that was because of that special state of mind, and it's not something that should apply. I think there's a danger there that,
Of
like,
course.
some people can just write it off as, well, that's extraordinary and it has nothing to do with my everyday life, right?
They could. I think where meditation takes you and where psychedelics take you, though, is to how can I cultivate self awareness in my moment to moment experience?
Right.
Not reach a peak meditation state
Yes.
or have this peak psychedelic state all the time, but
Right.
rather the lessons, as you said, would be to cultivate that self-awareness, right?
Yes,
And there's
definitely.
levels of self-awareness, right? The body, the mind, emotions, energy, that sort of thing. And I think that that's what pushing you to do, and it's pushing you to do that in your relationships. It's pushing you to do that in your interactions with finances, with stress, all of that. That's what it's trying to show you that psychedelics. You have this experience that look, everything is going to be okay. That's like
Mhm.
one of the messages that people often get. You
Sure.
got to go through the struggle. You got to go through the ups and downs of life. It's supposed to be this way. These are just the kind of just some of the impressions that a person might get,
Hmm.
like that it's all happening for a reason. These are some of the psychological conclusions that people reach with how the experience unfolds and reveals itself and feels.
Right.
Right? And so, um, knowing what you know and knowing what you've experienced, how can you let that knowledge allow you to let go,
Yeah.
right? As the Buddhists will say, how can it help you tap into that metta bhavana, that loving kindness
Hmm.
that Buddhists often talk about, right?
Right.
And so it reveals that to you, that these states and this way of looking at reality and integrating that aspect into my moment to moment experience is possible. And and that's kind of what we should be working on.
Right.
Yeah.
You'll see the same thing too from people that, say, have a near death experience, or well, let's just stick with that. Um in that experience was extraordinary. Obviously, like, you're not expecting to go back to that all the time. Hopefully not go
Right.
back to that all the time, but they're changed by it forever.
Mhm.
And they're changed by it because you've seen through something that you previously couldn't see through. Like, you've seen through an illusion you were falling for. And
Mhm.
once you've seen through it, you can never really fully fall for it again.
Yeah.
And hopefully what that glimpse then instantiates in you is a desire to cultivate the ability to see through that illusion more and more often in
Yeah.
your
Exactly.
regular life. Yeah.
Exactly.
Um, I think a good example of something, like, that we're talking about here, is actually, I don't know if you probably didn't catch this, but Sam Harris actually did long interview where he was talking to two Buddhist monks. Actually, they were interviewing him just recently on YouTube, and I've known this story before, but he actually told the story in a more complete. He went on for like half an hour on basically his individual journey about why he's sitting there talking to Buddhist monks, when he's the atheist, four
Neuroscience.
horsemen champion,
Yeah.
and so he goes through his entire story, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because his whole journey into any of that, and this is a guy who's got probably the biggest non-dual meditation app in the world, talks about meditation all the time, is a huge atheist, I think everyone knows, but uh what started all that off for him was an experience actually with MDMA when he was a teenager, that was specific. It wasn't like he went to a rave and took ecstasy with the at the dance party. It was, I'm taking this for a particular reason, to look at mine, because I've been told that there's something to see here. And he had previously done, he admitted, mushrooms with no real effect, actually, like other than just some sort of party experience or something. But on this, what he describes is that um, a stranger came into the room, or maybe it was a acquaintance of his, and he just immediately could see, like this guy was giving some kind of news about, I've achieved something, or I got a new girlfriend or something, and he could immediately see that being anything other than completely happy for this person, like if you were to be jealous of their accomplishment or something like that, that is like some sort of form of mental illness, is the way he describes it. Like and what happened is the collapse between self and other dropped, and
Yeah.
all of the things that usually you sort of have on guard just dropped. And this was a state of mind that he was just like, okay, this is something I've never experienced before, and I have, like, can't believe it's even possible. And that one experience, that was it. One experience then led to a search through India and Nepal, and an entire life of spiritual seeking, based on that sort of breakthrough event. And that's what I sort of mean. But he says before that, if you had told him about meditation and that, he wouldn't be interested. But instead, he dropped out of school and
Uh-huh.
went on a 10-year journey into, spiritual practices of the East to try to make sense of the experience he had. So I think his story is like one where is a really powerful way of showing what the use here can be for someone who is not inclined at all to follow a spiritual path at all, completely doing a 180 based on an experience on a substance.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating to see academics, researchers, scientists, physicians, therapists of all walks of life embracing the therapeutic as well as the metaphysical implications of these types of experiences. I think that the stigma is definitely far less than it's ever been.
Mm.
And we've reached a stage where we're taking this seriously with regards to, in its medicinal capacity and efficacy, as well as its potential to reveal to individuals a spiritual and metaphysical insight into what's going on.
Yeah.
Something that isn't otherwise accessible even through meditation or contemplative practice.
Yeah. So let's dig into that a little bit. We're sort of talking about this in two different veins. One is like a spiritual sacrament, or like a spiritual practice that can lead to a contemplative life. And that's like one sort of domain where people talk about these substances. And then there's the therapeutic side, where this is not the grandiose kind of goal, right? It's more like we used to talk about, like a catalyst in uh in therapeutic psychological therapeutic work
Mhm.
that helps there. So and I think it's important to point out that, like, there's no guarantee, like, on the spiritual side of things, um maybe to say it this way, there's not I don't think that either one of us would say these things are a panacea that are about to bring in the spiritual utopia or something. Like,
Right. Yeah.
like this is something that's highly personal to
Mhm.
your own conditioning, your own state of mind going in, all the conditions, just like a meditative practice. Someone could start a meditative practice, and what their result with that is going to be very much determined by where they started. And I think the same thing is true here. And
Yeah.
so it's one thing to talk about this in terms of like, well, this will give you the spiritual insight that changes your life. And it's another thing to say, hey, if you're depressed or you have addiction, the same substance can also, like, if that's at the stage of your life where you're at, can help you to overcome that as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, I think, yeah, and the research shows and demonstrates that it opens people up in all of these areas, whether substance addictions or other kinds of addictions, right? It helps a person reset, and even in the way that it works with the brain,
Mm.
it demonstrates that there are patterns that are changing physiologically, biochemically, and psychologically, and so that's a huge uh, part of the research that's been coming out over the past decade or two, and there's more than promise because the flying colors and the 60 to 80% ratio that's coming out. I mean, it's too good to ignore. But
Yeah.
at the same time, like you said, this isn't, we shouldn't think that this is going to bring about a utopia. We shouldn't think that this is going to be a cure,
Yeah.
where work doesn't need to happen following said experience, right?
There's a
There's
danger even in selling it as it's like bringing
Yeah,
the utopia, because when it doesn't, people will say, "Oh, we'll see, it didn't work," or whatever.
yeah,
Like, I think that expectations
yeah.
are important there, and
But anybody can
caution.
see why. Anybody can see why that type of a visionary experience can get a person to think that, hey, if everybody knew this,
Yeah.
we would be kumbaya, and to some degree.
But
But then, yeah,
you can also see
yeah,
that, like, plenty of people have taken psychedelics. There's a woman that's like I think she's a follower of Yogananda, and she says, "Yeah, my first experience was with a psychedelic as well, and you know what? I had my beautiful psychedelic experience, and then the next day I went right back
like
to being a
that.
miserable person instantly,
Yeah,
and I went straight back to my conditioning because my conditioning didn't collapse because I had that. I had to work through that work, that my karmas were still having to be worked through. And so it's not going to do that for you. And so, like, to think that, like, well, like sort of like Timothy Leary style, if
yeah.
everyone just took it, then we get the utopia ushered in, is very, very naive, I think.
Oh, extremely naive. Yeah,
Hmm.
extremely naive. But I do think that there's a lot of promising. There's a lot of promising data that do demonstrate it will be
Yep.
impactful and can be impactful. I don't think there's any denying that.
And it's somewhat a shame because that kind of exuberance is what actually shut down looking into this for so long,
Oh,
because there
really?
was such a immediate, as we all sort of know the story in the US, at least, because another great figure to bring up, obviously, in this realm is Ram Dass, Richard Alpert,
Yeah,
um, who, with Timothy Leary at Harvard, got kicked out of Harvard for basically giving LSD to undergraduates, I think.
yeah,
But also sort of recklessly, I mean, well, that's reckless, I think, to start, but like they weren't following the clinical procedure. Let's put it that way. And but then what's interesting about his case, though, too, Ram Dass, is that, like, he did sort of lean into the psychedelic. Like, he tells a story of, like, I just kept going back to the experience, whether it's LSD or mushrooms, and then as it's ending, I would feel this wave come back over me, and I would just be like, no, I just want to stay here. And
mhm,
like, and he would say, but, like, I realized eventually that it's always going to be temporary doing this. And then I went to India and started looking for some more long-term solution, right? So he's another example where the substance was necessary to give him an experience, and then at some point you go, okay, this isn't, though, the answer, it's just showing me the way, and
yeah,
and that kind of thing.
beautiful.
But that over exuberance in the 60s, is what led to the clampdown
Yeah,
on the problem, and now you lose 25, 30 years of possible research that could have
for sure.
happened.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so true, so true.
Mm.
Yeah, no, but we are here now, and now we gotta pick the research up, and eventually Joe Rogan's vision of psychedelic clinics everywhere,
Hmm.
where it's being used in a therapeutic, professional, spiritual context. I think that shows. I think there's a lot of potential there.
Mm.
Obviously, with this, one thing that we always talk about in these conversations is set and setting. A
Hmm.
person has to feel safe. They have to
Yeah.
feel support, and that sort of thing, because this is not an ordinary state of consciousness. So as long as it goes in that direction and not like a free for all, like, buy it off of the streets and use it recklessly and
Mm.
end up in situations that you would later regret, right? And so this is a very serious situation, meaning the experience and the time, that the length that it is, and how it affects the psyche,
Yeah.
and your cognitive and emotional and perceptive faculties. And so anybody should take it seriously. And but going back to the potential that it has, and where this could where this could actually go, again, not yielding a utopia, but definitely in terms of the philosophy and metaphysical frameworks that people adopt as a result, that could lead to solutions to world problems, right? If the
That's
right
sort of like saying
leaders.
that, like, if everyone can spiritually wake up,
Yeah,
then we can
basically.
have, and so like that is nice and all, but like I think that to ascribe that, like um I think we've had a conversation before where I say the ego is undefeated, kind of,
Mhm, mhm,
in the sense of like I'm questionable of all kinds of like spiritual utopia type claims, because
mhm,
I think there's a danger in it always seeming like we're right on the cusp or
mhm.
something. Like, oh, there's this great awakening happening, and it's all about to take a hockey stick curve up, and everyone's going to wake up and that kind of thing. I'm a little skeptical of those kind of
Smart.
claims, but I would say that though, of course, though, um, this plays a role, like we just both talked about, how like there's many people that just without something like this are never gonna have a chance
Mhm.
to move the ball forward, if you will,
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's whatever happens in a person's path and on their life journey to help them on their way is relative. Psychedelics will help people that it's meant for.
Yeah.
You say that Mother Ayahuasca calls people
Mm.
to her because she realizes that they need her assistance.
Yeah.
And so I think people who have a calling will experience what they need to experience, and people who are not necessarily going to benefit from that experience, will continue living the lives that they're living, and
Yep.
hopefully they find other means
Yeah.
for waking up, for healing, for
Yeah.
a cognitive perspective, or what have you.
Yeah, I think that that's a good way to put it, in that everyone's where they're at. The people that aren't interested won't be taking them. In fact,
Yeah,
you'll what they'll say, I mean, I'm sure you've encountered people like this. I know we probably both have online, where we're talking about this and somebody will come in and be like, "Oh, you want to scramble your brain? You want
right.
to uh have like gi- give yourself some unpure thing." I mean, I think we should talk about maybe a little bit the
Yeah.
religious objection
Of
to.
that's a good topic. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so maybe, and I think especially you might be like uber qualified to talk about that
yeah.
with your background. So please,
Right,
yeah,
right, right. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think people confuse, categories of what we would call quote unquote drugs,
hmm
right? That there's medicine that brings about healing, and that there's research on all kinds of medicine. Obviously, there's medicine that changes states of consciousness, which is what they're concerned about, right? Because whether they're biblical or what traditional religion you follow, there's going to be a prohibition in some certain traditions to not be intoxicated, to be sober,
right,
right? And that makes
right,
sense. And obviously, working mental health, we're having worked with in it in with with folks that are even in rehabilitation for substances. You know, the idea to push another substance forward is controversial, to say the least, in many people's minds. I mean, I would say that a person has to do honest analysis of the research that we have available to us, which is a lot of research. Look at what the results show, look at what is measured in those studies, right? And given the amount of data we have, and given the efficacy in areas that people need healing, like depression, anxiety, PTSD, personality scenario disorders and stuff like that. Like, this could definitely assist someone who might need it to be the first steps in becoming the better version of themselves,
Sure.
right? And so that's I think what it comes down to is what are the facts, right?
Yep.
Not just my anecdotal experience or your anecdotal experience, but what does qualitative research demonstrate?
Right.
Right? We are an evidence-based society. In academia, we are evidence-based, and that's what we would have to look at. It's not causing you to be addicted, right? And matter of fact, most people who take a psychedelic are like, I don't know if I can experience that again.
Yeah.
And if I do, I know that it would have to be way down the road
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
because I need to process this and integrate this.
So
Yeah.
let me jump on that a little bit and push a little bit more on this and see what you think about this. Um, I think if we talk about like the religious reasons for rejecting using a substance like this as let's say certainly as a spiritual practice, I think many people would be like, oh gosh, no. That
Right.
but even as a therapeutic practice, what is the spirit of the objection? The spirit of the objection has to do with using substances to cover up your feelings, to escape
Escape.
yourself, to dissociate.
Yeah.
And what the religious teaching is trying to say is that kind of thing is going to cause you suffering,
Mhm.
and that's going to send you to hell.
Yeah.
That's going to be something that's a sin because
Mhm.
it's going to cause you suffering, right?
Yeah.
And what's not realized when people start talking about these substances is that you're not turning away from your attention on the issue. You're turning towards it.
Towards it.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think that's why this is not shouldn't it does not violate the spirit of the religious exemption, because the
Yes.
spirit of the religious exemption is to keep you from becoming an alcoholic and
Exactly.
drowning your suffering
Sorrows and everything.
into dissociative substance, which causes more suffering,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if you agree with that or not.
Running away from your problems, escaping reality, so you don't have to deal with yourself and your issues, is exactly one of including what is sinful, the sinful behaviors and lifestyles that people tend to live.
Right,
Um, and so, yeah, no, it pushes you towards confronting that, right?
right,
The idea of the word psychedelic means that it kind of manifests or reveals what's going on in your own mind, in your own
yes,
psyche. And so it's not an escape from your problems, it's a confrontation with it. And so very much the direct opposite. And you see, that's all of that is part of the body of scientific literature
mm,
and perspective on these medicines. And so, yeah, no, I do think that people do need to reevaluate how we look at this, because there could be people who potentially could benefit from it that would never do it because they don't want to sin against God, or they don't want to get addicted and become a junkie.
yeah,
People who do drugs are thought of as junkies.
yeah.
People who
Yeah.
escape from their problems and run away.
Let's bring something else into this too on the religious. I think it's a really interesting angle, especially with your background and the people that you talk to all the time.
Mhm.
Another fear that I think the religious might have when it comes to this is, and they've seen this in other people, is once the person takes this substance, it changes their religious views in a way that might see as like blasphemous or
Yeah.
like you know what I'm saying, or like it the same thing can happen when someone has an NDE. Let's say they were a fundamentalist Christian and
Mhm.
then they had an NDE and they go, you know what? I was wrong about a lot of that stuff. Like
Yeah.
it's not like that exactly. And they soften in a way that people would be like, no, that's my identity. I don't want to
Mhm.
lose that. Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's one thing it does do. It definitely um, puts your identity and your ego in check, and
Hmm.
kind of puts you into perspective with regards to who you are and what reality is. And there's no doubt that there are deep um, metaphysical intuitions that come out of the psychedelic experience. And so for somebody who is kind of into this dogmatic fundamentalist way of looking at religion and life, yeah, it's definitely going to challenge that paradigm.
Right.
There's no doubt about it. Because this is a boundary dissolving, identity dissolving experience, and you transcend. It's a transpersonal experience, so you transcend these identities and realize that truth is and what is spirit, what you might call God, is something that is universal
Mm.
and unconditional in its acceptance, and that sort of thing. And so being stuck into a box, the sectarianism, the division, the us versus them,
Mm-hmm.
all of that is challenged. And
I'm
if a
right, you're
person,
wrong. I have the right answer and I own it and it's mine. I'm righteous about it. That
Mhm,
all sort of can fall away. And to
yeah,
someone who built their whole identity around that, that's annihilation, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the fascists and the sectarians and the dogmatic fundamentalists are going to be like, no, we don't want our constituents opening up their mind to other alternative perspectives.
Right.
And so let's keep any means that they might have to do that away from them by putting fear into them that this is inherently something that is sinful and demonic. This is one thing. A lot of the Christians will talk, and the Muslims as well. There's jinn and there's demons.
Mm-hmm.
On DMT, you might see entities
Mm-hmm.
and stuff like that. So there's warning of satanic influence and stuff like that. So those are definitely conversations that emerge. I will say that I do think that a mindfulness or a self-awareness or a grounding practice is definitely important,
Yeah.
right? Because it's going to reveal the shadows as
Yeah.
well, the shadow side of the psyche.
Yeah, for sure. In fact, maybe I could bring a little bit of my own personal experience into this conversation. So to close on that though, before I do that, I think one more important thing to point out is that religious exemption is built on a certain kind of fear. Then it's the same kind of fear actually like outside of religion in the 60s, right? When the clampdown came on psychedelics from the right-wing government, right?
Mhm.
There's a parallel there to be made that what there's a lot of fear around is, hey, this isn't going to make good consumers. This is if everyone decides that they're gonna just have this transcendent experience, they might not be so interested in buying things or
Consumer, yeah.
right.
Consumerism, yeah.
So if you're a hyper capitalist, hyper materialist society, they also represent, and you do see this from physicalist atheists, a lot of
Mhm.
them that say, hey, your physicalism is like, you might soften on that if you took one of these
Yeah.
psychedelics, and you see the same resistance. Like, oh, I wouldn't want to scramble my brain. I mean, that's somebody like Neil deGrasse Tyson talking to
Mhm.
Joe Rogan, right? And saying, oh, I wouldn't, it's very important that I think clearly and I don't want anything to scramble me up and like give me, and what he's really expressing there is the same fear that a Muslim that strongly is identified with their belief system doesn't want it shaken by having some sort of uncontrolled psychedelic experience that rocks their identity, right? And I think it's fair to say a very strong physicalist whose identity is wrapped up in that particular identity has the same feeling,
Same feeling, same concern. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. But like we said, it's not for everybody. And if
Mm,
you don't think that it's for you, nobody's pushing it on you,
right,
or saying that you have to do this or you should want to do this.
right,
But for those that have benefited from it,
yeah,
and having it available for those that could potentially benefit from this, I think that's an important conversation. Um, but there's going to be people who are open-minded and curious and discover gems that they could have never imagined as a
yeah.
result as well. So,
Yeah, I think it's important what you say there. Like, as soon as it's like, well, they have an objection, well, then they shouldn't do it. Well, guess what? They're not going to do it anyway, which is fine. And they also wouldn't get it. Like, this is the other thing. If they were like, hey, I'll take your advice. You say something's going to happen if I take this, but
yep.
their mindset is already whatever it is. It has a tendency to just confirm your mindset, right?
Mhm.
Like,
Mhm.
your mindset going into these kind of experiences is every bit as important as the substance that you're taking. Like, it I don't know if you sort of get what I'm just trying to say here, like that it's not gonna help the person that doesn't want any help. It
Right.
like that isn't looking for help. It's just maybe, and plenty of people take mushrooms or whatever because they wanted to go have a good time on Friday night with their buddies or whatever, and trip out in the cornfield or whatever, right? And like they're not going to have maybe an experience of self transcendence and that changes the trajectory. And that's fine. It's just what they're going to have. So I think like the idea that you can like force it on people. I mean, look, I have a fantasy when I'm talking to the most ardent physicalist, like, and I can't break
Mhm.
through at all. And
Yeah, I
I'm just like,
wonder what would
forget everything I'm saying. Just go take like 5 grams of mushrooms and then come back and talk to me after that, because like,
happen.
but I joke about that a little bit because the person that I'm targeting there is not going to have an experience that I want them to have necessarily, right?
Mhm.
Like it's no guarantee. It's
Yeah,
they're not looking for that. Just like that person, if I told them to go meditate, is also not going to have an experience through meditation if their mind's already made up
made
going
up.
in.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah,
sorry to go on a rant there, but yeah, I was gonna shift. There's so many things we could cover on this. I mean, we could probably do 3 of these podcasts on
yeah,
just this topic. But so getting past the sort of exceptions people have to doing it, whether they be religious, political, identity based of whatever stripe, or just fear. You brought up them being available still for people that do. And I think there's a really interesting discussion about what the best way to handle this is. Like, we had the 60s where it was like 50s and 60s where it was totally uncontrolled. It was just like, the government wasn't aware of LSD and psilocybin. And so Timothy Leary and Ram Dass got to have their party
right.
without there being any kind of laws in place about that. And then what happened was an overreaction where it just completely got shut down and all the substances got, basically uh, classified the same as heroin, and nothing could be done for 30 years. But then the question becomes, and I've had a lot because, and I was going to say to bring in my personal experience, I do have experience in a clinical setting, basically um, doing this in the way that you described, you touched on a minute ago about, well, it should be done with like, proper supervision, with proper integration, with proper preparation in a safe set and setting. And so I did this in a clinical way that like, that is slowly becoming available at various either edges of the law or legally in various circumstances around the world. And the question becomes, look, to do that, if you're going to do this the way that you're saying it should be done and the research is saying it should be done, that's very, very expensive, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And so like the question then becomes, and I've asked this of professionals that work in this area, what do
yeah,
you think? What do you think is how should this be done? And what I'm sort of surprised to find is nobody really knows, actually. Nobody really goes, well, here's how it should be. There's a whole bunch of people that sort of say, well, it should be decriminalized completely.
mhm,
And
yeah,
then because then they're thinking, well, if you make it medicalized,
mhm,
then it's going to be restricted access for basically very wealthy people, maybe, or that kind of thing. And so this question isn't as simple as it sort of first seems. But I'm really curious your perspective on this, also coming from some contact with like a professional background in psychology, and obviously, as you've already stated, seeing the sort of preferred way of using these things. Like,
yeah.
what do you think from a legal point of like what should be the path forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the trajectory of starting uh, with spiritual practice, which is already in place, like there's ayahuasca centers in certain areas in the United States, from what I gather. There's the spiritual right, the sacrament that people should be able to have available to them if that's what they believe in. And then there's obviously hopefully a means to do it through insurance, where insurance covers medical treatment, and this is a type of mental health treatment that people should have available to them. through their insurance companies.
So
I
let me stop you for a
yeah,
second and ask you this,
yeah,
because you sort of pointed at two, to me, distinct things there.
mhm,
One is like a spiritual sacrament that might fall under like freedom of religion or
yeah,
something like that, and freedom to practice your religion. And that's one direction of law that could go that way, right? And
yeah,
you could say like, well, and I think this has even been done. There's like places that have applied as like a church that
yeah,
says, this is our spiritual sacrament, and so it's not illegal for us to use this. And then of course the spiritual organizations control the access in that case, right, to
yeah,
these substances. And
mm,
then the other one you mentioned is a medical route, which then involves like the FDA, let's say, right? And like so no one would say, like the FDA themselves would say, we shouldn't be involved in approving or disapproving spiritual sacraments, right?
yeah,
We're the
yeah,
Food and Drug Administration. So these are two separate worlds.
right,
And so there's a medical world, and then there's also a third leg here. There are a lot of people that are for quote decriminalization, that just mean a sort of
free for
libertarian
all,
type
yeah,
of, not necessarily free for all, but kind of, yeah, like more like these should just be available to buy at a store
yeah,
on the street, and this is because if you don't do it that way, a whole bunch of people won't have access, and
mhm,
so this is where I was surprised to find, once I got into this world a little bit, that there is vast disagreements even among professionals in various areas. You have like the medical community, wanting to be extremely, rightfully so, cautious, and want it to be, we have to do all of the clinical trials, and then we'll go to FDA approval, and then it'll become like medicine, right?
yeah,
And we'll gatekeep that then. And then
yeah,
there's a whole bunch of people that think that it should be decriminalization and blah blah blah. So anyway, I'm sorry for all of that. So just to set that stage,
yeah, yeah.
do you have, I mean, I know it's a lot, but like, and I'm not sure I know what the right answer is either, but like, it seems to me that there are trade-offs to every kind of possible, future.
Yeah, and it might be all of the above. And I think that when you look at perhaps the cannabis industry, you could probably compare it to that somewhat. I
Mm,
mean, there's always a black market of cannabis in spite of the medical marijuana industry, in spite of the dispensary industry.
mm,
There remains to be a black market industry, people growing it, people are allowed to grow it, people are allowed to. I
mm.
mean, obviously, you can't sell it without a license. So, you always want to follow whatever the legal framework is. Um, in this situation as well with psychedelics. And so, I mean, we've seen decriminalization in the United States already, and we've seen
Yeah,
what happens when it's decriminalized,
yeah,
right? People, it is free for all.
yeah,
You get it
yeah,
wherever you want, and that has its implications. I mean, I'd like to, I mean, I definitely hope that it does. I don't think that it will. It can't lose its sacredness in the context of spirituality, and it can't lose its therapeutic value in the context of mental health. And so I think that just having that spaces where that can happen in a spiritual congregation or in a therapeutic setting, I think that's what I'm looking forward to.
yeah,
And I think, like you said, it's going to be expensive, whereas in the therapeutic context, it should be um, there should be insurances should cover that. There's no doubt. Obviously, it's different from going into Roland Griffith's office and at Johns Hopkins versus a retreat in Peru with beautiful scenery of natural scenery of
oh, all
animals.
that stuff, yeah, that's
You
another
just felt like
level.
a
There's
retreat.
a whole
That
industry,
that's
yeah.
I don't think insurance will cover that.
Well, you know what
Retreat.
that's about too. That's actually a mark of the fact that it's illegal in most places. And so where it is legal, there's sort of people taking advantage of that by setting up these high-end, highly profitable retreat centers that is like only for wealthy people that can afford it.
Yeah.
And but even if it's not that, even if it's the normal clinical route, that like I said, I've done some of this myself. Um,
Mhm.
the reason it's expensive is because it involves maybe two therapists. It involves a full day of two therapists' time, let's say, while you're having the experience. But there's also the preparation and integration that's required.
Oh,
And so,
yeah.
if you look at something like what MAPS tried to get approved by
Mhm.
the FDA with MDMA, which actually I mean, we can go into just that little episode, there's so much, as you know, I mean, I don't know if you know or not, but the FDA rejected
No, no.
their phase 3 trial application, and didn't approve it. And a
Under what
hugely,
administration? What
uh,
administration?
the
Was it
FDA, yeah, the
the
Food and
FDA
Drug,
did
they did
under
not
what
approve MAPS application to get MDMA.
what year?
Basically,
What year?
this
Under whose
happened. This happened just a year and a half ago, or less than that. No, maybe it was about a year and a half ago now.
yeah.
Funny enough, for me, it was like a catalyst to seek out, because I
Yeah.
was sort of waiting for an approval and then like maybe to do this through like a legitimate route, and like that felt like it's very interesting. I should say it this way: one of the reasons that it didn't get approved is because the FDA is very uncomfortable. It was like an application that's like the MDMA plus therapy, and there's no other drug. When the FDA does like a approval of a antidepressant or something, they're not evaluating the therapy. Also, they're just like evaluating the trial on the efficacy of the drug. And this is like it's not just an approval for MDMA; it's approval for a specific way of using it in a therapeutic setting with a protocol. And
Mm,
the reason that this becomes an issue is because it's not just a medicine. It's an experience that you have on the medicine that does the work. And the FDA is not in the business of spiritual experiences, you know?
yeah.
And so it sounds to them like this is wooish. Like, this is not science. This is not, and they kind of like, you can tell. And now this is not like the official reason that it got disapproved. But you can tell, I mean, it was part of the official reason that they're like, we don't understand why there's a therapy involved. Like, you need to come up with like trials that don't involve therapy and
Yeah.
only involve like people who had the placebo and people who had the medicine, and then we'll approve the medicine or not. And especially since the type of therapy that's used is more like a spiritual practice than it is a sort of cognitive behavioral therapy or something, right? It's more like a somatic experiencing or
Yeah.
a family internal family systems, these kind of like experiential modalities. And FDA was very uncomfortable, and so they and there was other reasons that but the real thing is, I think they don't want to break this barrier first, like to be the first that says, all right, we're approving things like this now,
Yeah.
and it was just safer to not. So anyway, it didn't get approved.
You
And
would think under the RFK, RFK came in when
mm,
he
mm,
was put in that position
yeah.
by Trump. Was he was good? One of his priorities was to get psychedelics through.
Yeah, especially for the veterans, and that's where the case was being made. This was for PTSD. That's what they were trying to get
Okay.
it approved for,
Yeah.
and that's why it was funny because Republicans. What's very interesting is that the Republicans ended up being the ones that were upset about this. The left actually, to some extent, fought against it. There was a group called Symposia that went in and testified at the FDA hearing, because you're allowed to do this. And these are a group of leftists whose real exception to getting this kind of thing approved is that it's supposed to be the communist utopia that changes the world, not the psychedelic revolution. And and so like you got the Maps guy. I forgot his name. The guy that was spearheading all of this research for 20 years, talking about how MDMA will unite the world in love, and everything will that we will bring in the utopia. And the left went, oh no 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 no, this is. And they're also not happy about the medical route because of the access and the money and all of that. And so there's a reason from the left to fight against the approval of this thing, which you'd think is just kind of bizarre, right? Like, it's like you wouldn't expect the what's his name, Dan Crenshaw with the eye patch, the Republican congressman, to be the one that is really upset about the FDA not approving a psychedelic, but that's how it came out.
Yeah, it's good to see. I mean, it's good to see both sides, I think, being for it. That's what I like seeing.
Yeah.
And it is something that I think is really and truly bipartisan.
Mm.
Normally, you would get conservatives who are like no to drugs, but this isn't.
No.
You're not causing somebody to be a junkie, and the stigma needs to be released. And I think that it is slowly but surely being released. I think it could happen. It should happen in our lifetime. I
Oh
see
yeah,
where.
yeah. I think that there's a momentum there, but it does face a lot of interesting. It's a very interesting world and unexpected to me. Like I expected it to be more consensus, like everyone agrees that we should just get this medical route done and it's safe and blah. But it's not really like that. It's quite chaotic, and there's a lot of forces that are like have interest in this, and it's as always a very controversial subject. So that's
Yeah.
an interesting part of it too. But I tend to think, and maybe we can move to this one real quick. We're talking about these as if they're two separate things: spiritual practice and mental health. um I tend to not want to make that separation, really. I don't think that I think that mental health improvement is spiritual practice.
Yeah.
And and part of the sort of, and just to keep on the theme of this podcast, physicalism is kind of one of the reasons that these two things get separated, because mental health became medicine, which is like taking a drug like your
Mhm.
antidepressant or whatever to fix the chemical imbalance in your brain, which is
Well,
causing your mental distress, when that's not how it works.
yeah.
Like that's not the metaphysics. And
Yeah.
so I think that there's this conflation that happens like where we're trying to scientize spiritual practice and we're failing at it. And you can
No.
see that. Like, I mean, the success of medicine in psychiatry versus other medical
Mhm.
fields that aren't
Mhm.
trying to do that is
Yeah.
striking, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. But look, I think that there's always been a side of psychology and mental health that has been spiritual. I get that in the more recent times, especially with cognitive behavioral approaches and it being a rigorous social science with data that needs to be produced, evidence based interventions and stuff, stuff like that. Um, but there's always been a metaphysical root of mental. It is the study of the soul. Psychology is
Yeah.
the study of the psyche, right? And so when you think of William James's variety of religious
Mm-hmm.
experience,
Mm-hmm.
or when you think about Carl Jung
Mm-hmm.
and his entire framework of archetypes and collective unconscious, and the personal unconscious, you think about mindfulness in Buddhism,
Yeah.
right, as a modality, a therapy modality that's researched in contemporary science for depression, anxiety, PTSD. Yeah, no, science shows that religion is something that is a positive in people's lives,
Right.
right? And usually, I mean, of course, there's room for error there, but usually, in terms of per person's mental health, that religion seems to be a good thing in people's lives in terms of them coping with life.
Yeah.
And so I think it's naive to get away from religion. Even in the 12-step program, Alcohol Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, reliance on a higher power
Right.
is something that's crucial,
Yes.
right? And Marianne Williamson was big on this in terms of saying that my problem with the left is that they want to get God out of everything.
Yeah.
I mean, I get the dogmatic fundamentalism aspects and the evangelical, you know, sectarianism and us versus them, and believe what we believe or you're going to hell type of scenario. But I think it's a very bad. It's secularism can go so far with regards to not talking about metaphysics and spirituality,
Well, I
which
think
is
the problem is that they do have a metaphysics, and it's
Mhm.
physicalism, and
Yeah.
there's no room for the psyche. The psyche doesn't exist in that
Yeah.
metaphysics. The
Yeah.
mind, it literally, what physicalism does is it extracts mind from the reality, and it says there is no mind. I mean,
Yeah.
ultimately, it has to say that because
Yeah.
it doesn't appear on the screen of perception, and so there, and this is a very serious thing. Like, this is why there's a mistake of saying that mental health is a scientific thing to solve. Like we're going to solve it by looking at brain and
Mhm.
not mind. When
Mm.
when actually what needs to be looked at is mind. And that's
Yeah.
why I think there's this tension of of spread it, like the separation comes from thinking there's something called spiritual practice and there's something called scientific mental health, and these are somehow completely separate, and they're not. Like there's not a way to turn this into a physical science. you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Qualitative. It's qualitative data in its nature, subjective and intersubjective, with objective data to talk about.
Yeah. It's not to say that you can't study the
Yeah,
effects
yeah,
in a scientific fashion, but
mm,
the work itself, the actual work itself
mm,
is first person experiential.
yeah.
Yeah. And
Emotion.
that needs to be, it's metaphysically acknowledged. It's the reason why the FDA is not the right body
R-
to look at the therapy, because
Right.
the therapy is
Yeah.
first
I
person
get, yeah.
experiential.
Yeah, I think the most that FDA can do is talk about, how well the body tolerates
Mm,
and metabolizes, the substance, and whether it's safe,
right.
and human consumption, and that sort of. I think it's limited to that, right?
Yes.
Um, whereas yeah,
There are people, hold on, that are trying to chemically engineer psychedelic substances to produce the whatever the effect is on the brain without any experience.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that's
yeah,
what they ideally like it to be, because then it's like, well, we just study what we can actually observe, and we don't
yeah.
have to rely on subjective reports or any of this stuff, and
Mhm.
we can eliminate that part. But the problem is that's that move to eliminate mind from the picture of reality, right?
I hear you, but I really think, knowing the schools of thought in psychology, and how psychology has always been an eclectic approach. I went to school for it.
Yep.
We were always taught to have an eclectic approach.
Yeah.
These are the different schools of thought: behaviorism, cognitive behavioral
Yeah.
therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, the psychoanalytic school of thought, but the evolutionary biological perspective. You take you take an eclectic approach and use what works for the individual, right? That's how we've always done it. When psychology is so relative and subjective, and there's things that are done during the diagnostic analytical period, and then there's the intervention,
Yeah.
right? There's the treatment plan,
Yeah.
and so that is going to be relative. But what just like what Carl Jung found is that there are patterns,
Right. Right.
right? There's similar and even in diagnosis, there are patterns. Personality assessments, there's patterns, and so knowing those patterns and seeing how the modalities that we use to intervene in maladaptive behaviors and maladaptive cognitive ways of thinking. I think all of that comes. You can't get away from spirituality. It's going to be an integral aspect of a person's well-being.
To me, the word
Yeah,
spirituality just means the empirical investigation of the nature of mind,
yeah,
which is what psychology is saying it's doing.
yeah,
So that, to me, they're just the same thing. Like we have prescribed this word to it, but what we mean is becoming familiar with mind.
yeah.
And I think that if insofar as somebody wants to take that out of it, that's to take out the whole thing.
Whole
Right. Like if
thing.
you want to say, no, we're going to divorce mind from the picture and it's just going to be a matter of brain,
Yeah,
you're going to miss the thing that matters.
yeah,
And look, I don't think it's quite that extreme. I mean, there is something like that, like in psychiatry, of sort of like, your depression is just a chemical imbalance in your brain. If we can find the right atoms to move around, we can fix your depression. And I mean, I don't think people, you know,
hmm,
that's stating it far too simply. But like, but you get the sort of if physicalism is what were to be true, were to be exactly how things work, this is a reasonable thing to
yeah.
try to do, right?
Yeah, but to I brought up the psychology schools of thought, the humanistic school of
Hmm.
thought with Abraham Maslow and his hierarchy of needs, and you
Yeah,
go to self-actualization and transcendence.
yeah, yeah,
There's another fantastic model by a psychiatrist by the name of Dr. James Fowler in terms of psycho-spiritual development
yeah.
in the different stages that people go through, and there's obviously the peak of it being a universal beyond the Stanislav Gross is another
Yeah.
psychiatrist, yeah,
Yeah,
and
there's
he's psychedelic
transpersonal
research.
work and psychology.
Transpersonal work,
Yeah.
exactly. Transpersonal school of thought is all about that, the
Yep.
transcendence,
Yeah.
right?
It's spiritual practice. That's what it
Yeah,
is. It's just relabeled. And I think like
mm,
it's my little pet peeve of mine, which is why I'm sort of hovering on this a little bit, that I have this thing I put up on TikTok sometimes as a background of like the Buddha sitting there and a bunch of scientists trying to fit him for a white lab coat, and like, and measuring things, and kind of trying to fit this into a purely scientific frame, comes from a physicalist mindset. And like, I think that what we're obviously seeing is um, these things that happen on psychedelics, or they happen through mindfulness. Like mindfulness is being brought in a huge way into
Yes.
psychology, right? Like you mentioned, and there's a reason for that. It's because if you want to work on maladies of the mind, you have to actually look at mind, not just
Yeah.
brain. And
Hmm.
yeah,
Hmm.
so
Absolutely.
that's cool. Yeah, and maybe to close, it's been a great discussion, and I really appreciate like your input. It's amazing to me actually how much we basically align on this. I think we're like pretty much perfectly aligned. I think both of us think that they have great promise in both for healthy people, in spiritual development. I mean, again, even
Cure, cure for physicalism and atheism.
I don't
That's
know about
what.
a cure, but at least yeah,
Right.
at least
Well, close to it.
yeah.
Close to it.
I think that like the objections, I think that they need to be used cautiously. They should be used seriously. Like I think that um, just like any practice, that's 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 aimed at you know a serious investigation into the self, they should be treated with some respect, right? It shouldn't be something that you do flippantly, or because like you just want to have an experience one day or whatever. Like I think that they can cause, like you mentioned at the outset, like very difficult states of mind. I've had to bring my to maybe to close on my own experience. So I mentioned um, I had meditative experiences that gave me a spiritual kind of opening very many years ago, that were enough. Were all of my transcendent. I've actually done, just to be perfectly clear, I've done mushrooms, and I've never had a transcendent ego death type experience on mushrooms. I
Well,
didn't need to, because I've already had that through meditative practice. But what I did have, there's a saying in psychedelics that like you're not going to get what you want, you're going to get what you need, right?
need.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and what I did have is descent into my personal karma and conditioning, my personal psyche, to show me things that I didn't see clearly, without the help of it. But those weren't fun experiences. This wasn't like, in fact, to say it's not fun is to understate it to a degree that's like almost comical. I mean, I had essentially hell like experience on, particularly on one where I got a little bit exuberant and took 14 grams of of mushrooms. But um,
Wow.
um, yeah, but and this was in a
Tell me
clinic
about it.
clinical.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason for that, I should temper that with like some context. My first experience on mushrooms, I took 4 grams and didn't even notice that something was going on. So then I took
Okay.
3 more, and I had a mild experience in
Mm.
a clinical setting. But I felt like I could have driven home at any time during it.
Wow.
Yeah, and
Wow.
so I'm someone who actually, it's probably more my psyche than my biology that's
Got
like
it. Oh,
resistant to kind of like pushing back against it. And so I decided foolishly to just like knock on the door harder, and
mm,
and I opened the door, and when you do that, this is the kind of risk that you take with these things. Like, you
mm.
don't get to control the experience that happens after
Yeah.
that. And I experienced essentially like a looping state that I thought was eternal for
Right.
it ended up being 4 hours, but it doesn't matter during the 4 hours.
Right.
What matters is that you are sure that it's never going to end.
And
Yeah,
oh, you know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
yeah.
I
So
know the mushroom loop.
yeah, yeah, and I've had that. So, but that was actually important for me to have this experience for various psychological reasons. And so, but the point is here, it's not all sunshine and rainbows and beautiful spiritual experiences
Mhm.
that
And
Sarah you
as is spirituality is not light and love. It's suffering
have.
and death.
Exactly.
And you
Exactly.
know,
That's a great point. That's a great
yeah.
point. Like, it's not all love and light. In fact, it's mostly the mud. There's a great
Yeah.
Buddhist saying, that like no mud, no lotus,
Mhm.
meaning that like
Yep.
the suffering is where the spiritual rubber hits the road,
Yep.
and psychedelics can do, and spiritual people that chase spiritual experiences too for like bliss states and meditation and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
um those are wonderful, and like they will show you things, but like really the integration and the growth, it happens in a way that doesn't you don't want to put on the front of the brochure,
Mhm.
if
Yeah.
you will. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So gosh, I really appreciate you having this conversation. I think like it would be great if you can come on again sometime. There's so many topics I think you and I could discuss, or you, me, and Alex, if he's available, regarding spirituality, but not only spirituality, but psychology, therapy, mental health, all the things, right, that matter.
Course.
But
Even metaphysics, even idealism, right, in terms of how it
yeah,
all comes together. Um, the perennial philosophy is something
yeah,
I'm very passionate about. Is in terms of the psychedelic experience that we're talking about, in
right,
terms of how it's really perennial and not just induced by substance, but is described by mystics throughout cultures and
yeah,
throughout history, right? And that's what William James's variety of religious experience, as well as so much other literature, documents so well, is
yeah.
that this psychedelic experience is with or without substance, is something that has profoundly affected the lives of human beings for as long as human beings have been around.
Yep. It's the
So
genesis of religion. It's the
yeah,
genesis of all of our religious traditions, um, spiritual literature, and it's a testament to it that like with our different backgrounds that you and I are sitting here talking about this, referencing a common experience that
yeah,
we've had, and we can
right,
talk about this. I mean, we have completely different backgrounds. I was a as atheist physicalist as you want. Like I was Christopher Hitchens, but angrier. Um,
mhm,
and I had no contact with religion at all. You have some religious background,
right,
but we share a common experience, whether it's through meditation or through psychedelics or through that we can both sit here and go, oh yeah, there's that thing that we know about that we don't know through concepts, and we
mm,
can reference that, and that's where the psychedelics can give people some sort of reference point to come together.
absolutely. That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah,
I definitely think that's a beautiful thing, and I hope that happens more often. And we're grateful for any time people talk about it and discuss it, because it's the world changes through conversations. And I think the conversation about what's real, what is metaphysically true, what are things like psychedelics revealing to humanity and to individuals, I think those are some of the most important conversations to have. They're very profound, and they speak to things like solutions and love and oneness.
yep, and transcending our differences.
Transcending.
Yeah,
Yes, transcending our it's the most important thing.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. This scourge of duality
Yes.
that I
Yes, yes.
say keeps everybody fighting with each other, right? And this is the project, and psychedelics certainly have their place in it. And thanks for going through it with me today. We will hopefully have you back on, and also, I'm sure we'll talk on other platforms going
Mhm.
forward. So, what? I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Stash. I appreciate it.
Cool.